move to the other part of the panel, to questions at this point from the audience. So if any of you have questions, we have a mobile wireless mic that we will come around.
I have a question for Margaret. You mentioned that there are some things that the executive branch and our president could do in spite of Congress without congressional action. Would you be able to name a few of those actions that we might be able to bring some pressure to bear as citizens? I would like to know what those specific things that the president could do if he chose to.
All right, well, I'll just give you a really short little example. Something they are doing, and I hope they're not going to stop doing it, but maybe now that the president said he doesn't want to do anything on the executive front, maybe I'll find out that they've decided to stop doing this. But we have, I come from a military background, so I'm going to tell you about a military issue. As you probably know, the United States military is deployed in more than 120 countries around the world, not just Iraq and Afghanistan, but doing all sorts of missions all around the world. When there's an earthquake, the U.S. military goes there. And U.S. military personnel are pretty normal human beings, and they don't spend every night sitting on their cots playing solitaire. They go out and meet people, and the U.S. military is basically like a global employer. They have American citizen employees who meet foreigners and fall in love, have babies, get married, sometimes don't get married, but have babies, and they want to bring them back to the United States. So the U.S. military has huge immigration problems, just like the rest of America. We have U.S. citizens serving in our force who are married to foreigners, and they want to bring them into the United States, and they run afoul of our immigration laws. We also have people living in Washington State who are serving in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines who meet and fall in love with people they meet in high school or college who turn out to be undocumented immigrants. And they find themselves married to these individuals, and they want to get them legal. And they go, gosh, I'm in the Navy. I'm a sailor in the Navy here in Washington State, and my wife is an undocumented immigrant. That's ridiculous. She's entitled to housing benefits from the federal government. She's entitled to a military identification document. She's entitled to health care from the military system. She's entitled to all these benefits, and she's an undocumented immigrant. I want to get her documented. And until about a year and a half ago, this sailor would have to go down to immigration, and they'd say, your wife's undocumented, you can file a visa petition for her, and she can go down to Juarez. And when she gets down to Juarez, they'll tell her she's banned from the United States for 10 years. And then you can file all this paperwork, and meanwhile she'll get to hang out in Juarez. We know how dangerous it is down there right now. And meanwhile, you're going to be deployed for 6 months on the USS, name your ship. While your wife's in Juarez, your new baby, we don't, do something with the kid because you're getting sent on a ship and you can't bring your baby, and maybe your wife can take the baby to Juarez with her, or you can give the baby to foster care in Washington State temporarily until your wife gets back, whatever. This is what military personnel would be told. This is similar to what everybody else is going through that's not in the military. But the Department of Defense realized that they had a readiness issue with the number of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who had immigration problems and were frantic. And I was the recipient of a lot of this stuff because I would get phone calls at 10 o'clock from Marines who were crying because their wives were stuck down in Juarez and couldn't get back in the country, and the parade of horribles, and ma'am, I'm about to deploy and I can't get my wife in the country, and this is ridiculous. I'm going to Afghanistan for a year, and my wife's not going to be here when I get back. So the Department of Defense requested from the Department of Homeland Security that they look into administrative ways that this problem could be resolved. And lo and behold, the lawyers at the Department of Homeland Security noticed that for years they had been exercising administrative discretion in favor of Cubans who were in the country in an undocumented manner, and that they were legalizing Cubans, and the procedure they were doing was invoking something called the parole authority. They'd find a Cuban in the United States, and for foreign policy reasons they would grant them something called parole, and that would essentially make them legally eligible to apply for their papers, and they were eligible to file paperwork and get a green card under existing law. No change in the law necessary, using existing authorities. They were doing this for the Cubans, which, by the way, was a reason why a whole bunch of Mexicans were pretending to be Cuban, you know, because that's the only way you can get it, okay? So if you were Cuban, you had there's an amnesty that's been going on for Cubans for decades under this program. And it's perfectly legal, and the executive makes the decision that this individual is not a threat to national security, they're not a criminal, they're not doing drugs, they're not a gang member. We're going to give them this thing called a parole. It's not a criminal parole, it's a special immigration type parole. And that will make them legally eligible to apply under the law for their paperwork, and they won't have to leave the country and be banned for 10 years. So the military convinced the Department of Homeland Security to do this for military families. And this has been a very successful program. It's allowed military families, again, under existing law, they get fingerprinted, they come in, they file all their papers, they pay the fees, they get a criminal background check, they have to pass all the admissibility criteria, you know, I don't do drugs, I'm not a criminal, you know, all this kind of stuff. The only problem it cures is the fact that we have this wacky law that says they got to leave the country, and as soon as they leave, they're banned for 10 years. So they've been able to do this administratively, and they've helped hundreds of military families ease the morale burden, eased you know, soldiers going off to be deployed are no longer worried that they're going to come back and their family's not going to be here, or their wife's going to get murdered in Juarez when she goes down there to try to get a visa. It's been a very successful program, and it's administrative, using existing laws, existing authorities, didn't require an act of Congress. Now, someone in the Department of Homeland Security proposed that they expand the scope of this program, because they could expand it. Right now, they're doing it for Cubans, and they're doing it for the family members of military personnel. Why not do it when you have a critically injured U.S. citizen who needs his or her spouse to be there to provide medical care? Why not do it for DREAM Act beneficiaries? Why not do it for a whole host of other people that are not a threat to U.S. national security? They're not criminals, they're not gang members, not dealing drugs. Their only problem is they've run afoul of our complicated immigration laws, but they're not bad people, and they could get their status straightened out if they could leave the country and not be barred for 10 years. So the administration looked at that, and they said, no, we're not going to do that because members of Congress complained that this was an amnesty for illegal immigrants. We can't have an amnesty for illegal immigrants. So currently, they're still doing it for Cubans, and they're still doing it for military families, but they're not doing it for anybody else. Now, it doesn't require changing the law. It simply requires leadership from on top to explain to Congress the immense benefit to the United States from exercising this type of administrative discretion favorably. We're not benefiting right now from having thousands of ICE officers running around trying to round up the spouses of American citizens. We need law enforcement to concentrate on the things that the sheriff was telling you that are top priorities. Murderers, rapists, drug dealers, you know, not spending tons and tons of government resources on people who are absolutely no threat to the United States of America, but are simply what we call regulatory violators. You know, the laws have gotten so complicated, or they entered the United States when they were 2 years old, and they've been here ever since, gone to our schools, haven't done anything wrong. You know, the only problem they have is they can't get legal. The administration could resolve that problem administratively, however they have chosen not to do that. Now, some people say, well, why haven't they chosen? It appears, at least when I read the newspapers, that there are a fair number of people that don't realize that they have the legal authority to do some of these things, because some of the folks appointed to high-level positions don't have a background in immigration. So it's kind of like they put somebody in charge of the IRS who never filed a tax return and didn't know what a catch-40 was. You know, it might take them a while to figure this stuff out, and immigration law is enormously complicated. That's another reason why you don't want to be enforcing it. A federal judge once said, it's like King Minos' labyrinth in ancient Crete. Well, that wasn't a compliment. Okay. Another federal judge said, immigration laws are designed to accelerate the aging process of federal judges. Okay. I mean, this is a code that is just unbelievably complicated. And every good immigration lawyer spends a couple hours every day just like keeping up on the latest changes. There are so many federal agencies that have their fingers in immigration. They're changing things all the time. There are administrative memos that, there's no indexing system that makes any sense for any of them. So you just have to know the memo exists. And, you know, the law is based on these obscure administrative memos. There's complexities in the code that just absolutely boggle your mind. Another example is, it's in the news right now. You're probably hearing there's an attempt now to stop illegal immigration by changing the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Okay? The 14th Amendment says that if you're born in America, you're a citizen. And a lot of people are convinced that they can fix immigration if they just stop people from becoming citizens if they're born in America. Okay? Now, I will tell you that the only simple rule in all of the United States citizenship and immigration law is the rule in the 14th Amendment. That you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. That's the only simple thing. If they mess with that, I mean, it is full employment for immigration lawyers for time immemorial. Because the rules regarding people who are not born in the United States being citizens are even worse than the immigration code. They are super duper complicated. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of that. Okay, I was in private practice in Anchorage, Alaska, and I did consultations. People would come in and I'd solve their immigration problems. They'd pay me some money and I'd tell them, your case is hopeless, or, you know, I can do this, whatever. So somebody signed up for consultation one day, came in to see me, and he paid in advance because that was my rule. I never saw anybody for free because otherwise, you know, I would never make a living. So he had paid my consultation fee in advance, and he came in to see me, and I said, okay, so how can I help you? And he said, well, I've been living illegally in the United States for 22 years with a fake name and a fake social security number, and I was born in Mexico, and I heard there was an amnesty, and I want to get legal. And I heard that you're a really good immigration lawyer and you can get me legal. And of course my face fell, you know, because there's no amnesty going on. This was a street rumor that he had heard. But he had bothered to come in and see me and everything, and he'd already paid his fee. So I said, okay, let's sit down and I'll go through your family history and see what I can do for you. And so I went through his family history. At the end of an hour, I said to him, the bad news is there's no amnesty. The good news is you're an American citizen. You've been one since the day you were born. All you got to do is take these papers relating to your American citizenship that show you derived American citizenship through your father. And it was a very complicated fact situation, but he was actually born an American citizen. He didn't know it. And I said, if you send these papers off to the passport office, the Department of State, they're going to send you back a passport. And he said, wow, I didn't know that. I've been to 5 other lawyers, and nobody told me in 22 years that I was an American citizen. I said, well, you know, I'm telling you, you're a citizen. Here's the law, blah, blah, blah. You know, I laid it all out for him. He sends the papers off. 6 weeks later, he gets his passport in the mail. Now, this is a guy who was living, quote, illegally in the United States for 22 years with a fake name and a fake social security number. Empowering, you know, who knows, the fake document people, you know, were benefiting. He turned out to be an American citizen. That meant that his kids, whom he thought were illegal immigrants, also were American citizens. Okay, so bingo, he goes and, you know, straightens this out. But what it does is it illustrates the complexity of these laws. We have people running around America right now who are U.S. citizens who don't know it. We also have people running around thinking they're U.S. citizens and they're not because of the complexity of the law. Nobody understands that this is an enormously complicated system that we have created, an enormously complicated legal regime that we have created. And we're not going to fix it with any simple solutions like, let's change the 14th Amendment and build some new bureaucracy to check on everybody's parentage at the moment of their birth. We're not going to fix the system by hiring more and more law enforcement officials. There's a study in the Political Science Quarterly the other day says Department of Homeland Security is spending $630 million per life saved from terrorism. $630 million. Okay, somebody calculated that out. Now, yesterday, hundreds of Americans died in the United States, not from terrorism, but from tornadoes. And you can bet that we do not have the resources being spent to save those lives at the rate of $630 million per head. I mean, it's just not happening. But we have created this huge shibboleth, and you talked about it, the post-9/11 connection between terrorism and national security has caused us to say, you know, we're going to build the biggest regulatory mechanism we can build, the biggest law enforcement mechanism we can build. It's going to save us somehow. It's not going to save us. It's going to bankrupt us under the bureaucracy and the regulation. And what we need to do is simplify things. We need to go back and look at what do we think national security means? What kind of life is a life that makes me feel secure? Is it a life where my identity is checked every 5 minutes by a federal agent? Is it a life where federal government agents are running around rounding up DREAM Act kids and deporting them? Is that the kind of life that I want to live in America, the one that makes me feel secure? If it's not, then we need to be going out and making the arguments to people that our national security might be better served by a different approach. And that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope I gave you one example anyway of some administrative action that the administration could take. There's other ones out there, temporary protected status, other administrative waiver, ways that people could file waivers. And of course, the administration could lead the way and get Congress to maybe repeal some of these silly laws that are actually causing barriers to legality. One massive repeal of the law that the administration can't do administratively necessarily, but they could just go ask Congress to repeal it, is that silly law that says you're barred for 10 years if you leave. They could just repeal that, and that would allow hundreds of thousands of people to become legal, to comply with the law, apply for their papers. Not criminals, not drug dealers, not bad people, the people who have simply run afoul of the law, now stuck in the United States and can't leave.